Hey, it's Kara, your host. I'm here today because I'm often asked, what should I read next? Or what is your all time favorite book? And that is why I created this list. This list isn't a declaration of the greatest books of all time. Rather, it's a collection of the stories I can't stop thinking about, the ones I've recommended more times than I can count, and that continue to live rent free in my head. Whether you're looking for your next unforgettable read, or just want to see what books have shaped my reading life, I hope this guide of 25 books inspires you to discover a new favorite. Head on over to the link in the show notes or to bookishflights.com/read/25 books. Hi, I'm Kara Infante, and this is Bookish Flights. In each episode, I chat with one bookish guest as we take some time to sample and savor the pairing recommendations from their bookish flight. We hope to give you suggestions to cultivate your TBR list and nurture your leisure time through books. In today's episode, I am chatting with Denise Smith Cline. Denise grew up in a textile town in upstate South Carolina before the world got so complicated. The youngest of 5 spirited siblings, Denise realized early on that to survive, she needed to master the dual arts of watchfulness and eavesdropping. A shy kid, she buried her face in books and found a few fine friends for company until college offered an escape from the comfortable terrors of small-town life. Denise started her writing career as a newspaper reporter fresh out of Davidson College. Denise practices employment law in a firm she founded in Raleigh, North Carolina. She reads constantly and has an abiding interest in people from big families and small places. When she's not working, reading, or writing, she loves good conversation with her beloved family and friends, singing in a choir, cycling, and eavesdropping. We're here today to talk about her latest novel, The Resettlement of Vesta Blahnik. Welcome to the show, Denise.
Thank you, Kara. I'm delighted to be here.
Well, I am so excited to have you on the show. I just finished The Resettlement of Vesta Blahnik a few weeks ago, and I loved it.
I'm
I
so
tore through the
delighted.
book. I'm a huge historical fiction fan, so it was right up my alley, but I absolutely loved that book. So thank you
Well,
for
thank
sharing.
you.
You're welcome. So before we dive into that, though, I feel like we're so much more than these bios, although I'm so intrigued by a few things in here. But why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are?
Well, of course. So as the part you read indicates, there's some pulling and tugging in my life. And part of the thing that I think so many writers have to juggle is their day job
Yeah.
and also their night job, which is marriage and children. And so often it's hard to fit in all the things. And so although I have been sort of a devoted reader and writer my whole life, it really wasn't until my children launched.
Yeah.
I have twin children that I began to really focus on, what I've been doing with my spare time, of which there has not been a lot. Um,
That's what I was just thinking. As a parent,
right,
there's not much.
right, right. And they were my children have always been very supportive. And I will say this, and you hear this from so many different writers. I was very fortunate to find pretty early on when I decided to do more writing a really close-knit group of writer friends.
Yeah.
And they have really helped propel me through, a couple of novels, some short stories, essays, and given me kind of the confidence to send the Vesta Blahnik and other things out in the world. So it's sort of a combination of a little bit more time and a lot more friends that has sent me on this journey.
Yeah. So for someone that's maybe newer to the writing world and is thinking, well, how do I find this writer group or writer friends? Because I have heard that from quite a few on the show. I would majority probably. But
Mhm.
how did you find that? How did you come across them?
So I started, it's a small kind of little trickle of things that grew into sort of a cascade. I met a friend, who I went to college with, who told me
Okay.
about a prompt writing class in her neighborhood, and so I went to that and sort of picked my interest up. I joined that picked my interest up, and then I joined the North Carolina Writers Network, which is and I'm sure most states have something similar, very active, meet several times a year met some people through that, began to sort of submit things to editors and so forth. And then in workshops that I started attending, I met other friends. And
Okay.
then we would go out to these workshops and then meet other people. So in that way. And then once a week for years, I have been doing a planned workshop where I meet with a dedicated group of writers and we submit every week and read aloud our work. So
Wow.
just start small, and I think with interest you will find, new writers can find their people.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. And I think with anything, right? Even writing, start
Yes.
small.
Yeah.
like like how to eat the elephant one bite at a time,
That's
right?
exactly right. That's exactly
Yeah.
right.
So had you, well, it sounds like you've always been a writer then.
Yes, well, I mean, I started as my bio indicates as a journalist, very different kind of writing,
Yeah,
and then being a lawyer, you write constantly, very different kind of writing as well. But I've always rather tried to make my lawyerly writing concise and and as elegant as possible.
sure.
And so really, in some ways, I write every day and have written every day forever. But in terms of the creative part, I think it is it has gone in fits and starts, and I've taken courses and then come back for 6 months, and my laptop or whatever has sort of lain fallow, and I have done nothing. And it really, like I said, until I kind of launched my children and felt like I
Yeah,
had some time, I didn't really focus that much on creative writing, although it was a constant urge,
sure.
an unsatisfied urge,
Yeah. But lingering, waiting for its time
Yes,
to come into
yes,
the ring.
yes. And like I said, reading all the time. So that
Yeah.
helps a lot.
I will say, so episode 153 came out this morning, and
Mhm.
I'm trying to add in my head and think about, but I think I've had at least 7 to 9 guests that are attorneys, like either former or current, that have become authors.
Mhm. It's a plague. And no, it's true. And I find so often, I'll have a writer that I really enjoy, like Elizabeth Strout.
Yeah,
And then you dig into her background and she's another darn lawyer.
yeah,
So I do think that precision with words and is important for lawyers. And also, as a lawyer, I say that, telling stories is what a lot of lawyers have to learn to do effectively to convince judges and juries and
sure.
whatever. So it's really so much about stories, however you cast those stories.
Yeah, we've also talked a lot about the show of like identity, and we go into this career and how that doesn't have to fit in that box though. And if you really think creatively about what you can do, you can see that it can apply in so many different ways or facets in your life. And I'm hearing you say exactly that. So thank you
Exactly
for
that.
being,
Yes.
yeah, another example of that.
Yeah, no, exactly right. So,
Yeah,
yeah, and I do think that the kind of law that I do, which is employment law, has so many stories. And I used to joke when people asked me what that was, I would say, well, it's kind of sex, lies, and videotapes, because everybody has a story, and
yeah,
sometimes it's about money, sometimes it's about family, sometimes it's about oppression, sometimes it's about something very different. But it is not just the plain letter of the law in any way. And so really in some ways my legal career has inspired other ideas for me about stories, and people in different positions.
yeah. Well, you're finding it all around. I love that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, for listeners that maybe have not gotten to pick up The Resettlement of Vestiblanec yet, let's tell them about it.
Okay. All right. So the Resettlement of Vestiblanc is a historical novel, and it is inspired by, but not based on. It's inspired by a true story.
Okay.
The true story is, and Vesta's story is, she's a 30-year-old woman with very few prospects in Minnesota in 1937, which was really a tough time all over the country,
Yeah.
kind of all over the world in terms of the Great Depression. And her situation got worse and worse. Her father sort of abandoned her to a new marriage. The farm that she lived on was in a very hard part of Minnesota. Things were going badly, and her father kind of abandoned her. And so she despairs, and she begins to get some letters from a man, purportedly a farmer in North Carolina. And the letters sort of encourage her to, to talk to him. And then one thing leads to another, and she accepts an invitation to come to North Carolina to meet this man. And she doesn't realize until she comes to meet this man in North Carolina that he is actually in a mental institution, and that the letters were not written by him, but by his family in an effort to get her to come to North Carolina. And so the resettlement of Vesta Blahnik is her story, and her partner Gordon Crenshaw's story, and how their lives intertwine, and the challenges they face after that.
Yeah. And I think anybody that has read historical novels, right, is like like I felt like I was in the place. And I grew up in Chicago, so I'm thinking like these harsh, terrible winters when you
Mhm.
have nothing, barely anything on this farm. You're trying to get food out of the ground. It's like a shanty you're living in.
Mhm.
And then also, like, you hear about the mental institutions and how people were kind of unjustly
Mhm.
sent to mental institutions, and then it's really hard for them to get out. And do they ever get out? And so there was so much of that, of like, but you brought it together in the story, and I didn't realize it was a true story. So I love that addition to it now,
Yeah,
or
and when
based
I
on.
say yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
exactly, based on, and so all of the characters I made up. I mean, every
sure.
single character is just born out of my head, but the outline of the story is true. And the other piece of it that I found interesting, and we can talk more about this too, is that I sort of wrote the book. I heard the true story, and I thought, what would cause a woman to do this? What would
Yeah,
cause a woman to give up everything and move thousands of miles away to meet a man that she's never met and has nothing, no real history with? And then I began to do some research into the Depression. And one of the very first New Deal programs that Roosevelt put into place was a project called the Resettlement Project. And so thus the resettlement of Vesta Blahnik,
sure.
and the resettlement project kind of, I mean, the resettlement aspect and the depression aspect of this kind of highlights some other interesting parts about, the New Deal, in which we kind of think, it saved the country. There's so many interesting projects and so forth. In some ways, it also caused great hardship,
Yeah,
um, because people, even though they got help, it displaced people, and so it's sort of the another side of a very important outreach program in the New Deal that affected a lot of people. So, and then, like you said, the mental institution that is featured in the story is, I live in Raleigh, North Carolina, and it
okay.
is actually, Dix Hill is in Raleigh. And as in the way of many, many mental institutions like that, the city has now bought the property. It's this beautiful hilly property, and has turned it into sort of a central park for the city of Raleigh.
Wow.
So, the transformation from 1937 to now is not in the book, but it is sort of part of our daily lives here in Raleigh. So I think I really enjoyed that part of the research as well.
That's so interesting. So are any of the buildings still existing?
Yes.
Wow.
And there's some really spooky stories about that mental institution. I think probably I could say any mental institution.
Yeah.
But there's apparently some ghosts, and the big old hospital itself described in the book is still there.
Wow.
And the Dix Hill overlooks the city of Raleigh, and
Okay.
because it's really high up on a hill. And the cemetery, there's a cemetery that's mentioned in the book, and also a sort of creepy and magical place, because as the book mentions, many of the grave sites are identified only by number.
Yeah.
And so there's a great anonymity in some of the former people who lived and died there. So
Yeah. Yeah, well, I loved both of the characters. And because I'm thinking, like, our listeners thinking, oh, this guy kind of conned her into coming to North Carolina. But like you said, it's the family that's kind of behind it. But I loved both the characters because I thought it's so true. I think people try to do their best with the circumstances they are given, but we're placed in hard times. And sometimes we maybe do questionable things. Again, not saying that either of the characters did that, but
right.
they both were just such good people
Mhm.
in really harsh circumstances.
Right. Yeah, and I think, one of the things too, one of my children has described the modern concept here as catfishing. You get a
Yeah.
invitation from somebody dating, and they turn out to be completely different story and so forth. In this case, not a not intentional,
Yeah.
but also, in so many ways too, marriage and courtship, there are always things you don't know, and
Yeah.
even in likely relationships. And I think this was an unlikely relationship. So that concept too of, two people who meet each other and they have secrets and they have lies, and then they have to figure out their way forward. I find a great deal of interest in that. I have a great deal of interest in that.
Yeah. And the exact question you said about Vesta of like, would, because I always try to put myself in the character's shoes, and I'm like, would I have gone from like the only place I've ever known? And especially in that time, like, you weren't traveling around the country. Like, oh, I've been to North Carolina before, no big deal. I'll go move my life there. Like, people weren't doing that in
Mhm.
1937. So, would I have the courage
Mhm.
or be, I mean, maybe forced my hand, but to move to North Carolina to someone I've never met?
Mhm.
I don't know. I don't know that I would have.
Yeah, I don't know. I would have either. But and one of the interesting things as I wrote the book is, one as the writers who are listening to this know, we're often told to, throw every bit of trouble you can at a character.
Yeah.
And I had thrown so much trouble at this character, and one of my editors said, "You got to throw more." And so, so in some ways, her situation became so desperate that she really had no choice.
Yeah.
Um, and I have to tell you, Carrie, I grew up in sort of a suburban upbringing, and I knew nothing about livestock. And there's some livestock in the book, and
Yeah.
I had to do a heck of a lot of research on, how much a pig weighs and how much a pig cost in 1937, and cows and chickens. And so that
Yeah.
part was, if you looked at my browser history, you'd wonder if, one day it's legal stuff and the next day it's, how
Livestock.
how often to milk a darn cow,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah. That was the part also too, I feel like that frustrated me. I'm trying not to give too much away to the listeners,
yeah.
but about the father is, I mean, farm life is hard,
Mhm.
hard work, constant work,
Mhm.
day in, day out, no respite from that.
Right.
And she was like the workhorse from the farm. And then for him to kind of, I mean, you already said, like up and leave her,
Yeah.
I'm like,
Yeah.
she's
Yeah.
still your responsibility, even though she's an adult daughter and has been your workhorse on the farm for years.
Yeah. Yeah, he's a mean guy.
Yeah.
And so and so one of the things interesting to me, at least in the book, was, there's men and women, and he's certainly not a good guy. And so in the book too, I realized that, not only was Vesta surrounded by women, some of whom were very helpful, some of whom were not, but I wanted to make sure that some of the men, and I found some showed up for me, some characters showed up for me, kind men
Yeah.
who contrast to her father. And that was sort of a part of the adventure too, is making sure that the characters were rounded and full.
Yeah. That was beautiful for her to have the kindness on the other end of it. So,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
yeah. Well, what did you learn about yourself through writing this book?
So I think every writer has to learn patience, and I think every writer has to learn resilience in dealing with, rejection and self-doubt and other doubt
Yeah.
and constraints on time. I will say that this book helped me. I mean, I made Vesta up, and so she was in my own head, but then she sort of turned around and inspired me.
Yeah.
Um, she had a very different life than the one I grew up with, but she had enormous resilience, and
Yeah.
she had enormous capacity to sort of pick herself up and get going and do the things she had to do. And I think sometimes as a writer, you have to do that too. And sometimes the story is not coming, and sometimes you want to beat your head against the wall, and I'm not a big plotter as a writer. And
Yeah.
so sometimes I don't know where I'm going, and it's so tempting to give up. And kind of Vesta helped me understand that persistence and perseverance is probably 80, 90% of it.
Yeah. I've had a guest say, like, I was more stubborn than the book.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
And it's
Totally.
stuck with me ever since because I mean, I have not written one myself, but I admire so much that persistence for you all to put these, I think of them as babies, but these babies into
Yeah.
the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And like any mother knows, once your baby is in the world, you watch the world bat the child around, and you're like, you can do so little after they're out there in the world.
Yeah.
A book is the same way. And it's very vulnerable to send your baby out in the world, whether it's a human baby or a literary baby.
Yeah. I know. I'm thinking of what other Hadley Ledgett came on and she goes, and no one's rating your baby on Goodreads. But then having that tough skin, or whether you read it or you don't, but having that too, that's a lot.
Right, totally, totally.
Yeah. Well, what is your wish for readers when they pick up the resettlement of Vesta Blahnik? What do you hope they'll take away from it?
So I hope that readers will read this book. We, so many times are hard, and I think we're living through tough times.
Yeah.
And I think that it is hard sometimes to find hope. Whoever you are, wherever you are, the world is changing so quickly. And we forget that there have been other bad times and other times that were challenging. And I love a story with some redemptive power. And so I'd love for the readers to come away feeling like even in the hard times, even when everything seems impossible, there are points of light. And there's as I think I said in my bio, rubble that glimmers, shines in the rubble. I think that's what I'd have them take away is that not only are there points of light in some bad times, but there can also be points of love that we're not expecting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as hard as they are, being open to that. But it is, I mean, like in saying that, it is hard to do when you're in a tough spot.
Right. And also remembering that fiction, just like life, they're tough times, and there's also imperfect connections.
Yeah.
And just because people find each other doesn't mean it's perfect. And just because people resettle doesn't mean that their new home doesn't present new challenges. And you keep going and
Yeah.
you find what you can in the rubble.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for sharing the
Yeah.
resettlement of Esteblanic with us. Listeners, go pick up a copy. You will not be disappointed. Let's
Mhm.
switch gears a little bit and talk about who you are as a reader. So, what genres do you enjoy reading?
So, I find it so interesting to listen to your podcast and listen to other writers and what they say. I have this weird sort of schizophrenia about reading. I have a paper book always going and also audiobooks always
Yeah.
going. And, it can be, I love Jane Austen and I love a good thriller and a mystery. And I, love one of the books I've read in the last year is a fascinating book that raises all kind of interesting questions about placebo and health and that kind of thing. And the book is Wellness with
Okay. Oh,
Nathan Hale.
I've seen that
Yeah,
one.
yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, it's
bright color,
fascinating.
bright cover,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. And it's so interesting, very new, very interesting concepts, lots of interesting ideas. And I love an Irish, police mystery. So it's all over the board for me. But and the, and I have to say I have sort of a special fondness for Irish writers. And so whether it's, Claire Keegan or Tanner French or,
Yeah.
Colin McCann, or if it's Irish, I'm gonna love it usually. So that's one of my sort of soft spots.
Yeah.
But I'm in 3 book clubs, Kara. And so one is sort of a fiction, nonfiction book club. And
Okay.
the nonfiction part, I probably wouldn't necessarily be drawn to, but I've learned a lot. And so I do a little bit of dabbling in both areas.
Yeah, I think that book clubs are great for that when they challenge you. And it doesn't mean you have to love the book, but usually you
Right.
learn something from a book, regardless if you like it.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
I was in a book club a few years ago. I'm like wishing I could, get another one of these going, but we would read more Not always the classics, but definitely books that were, written 20, 30 years ago. And then we would read like two or three classics a year. But it challenged me because I don't read like that in every day.
Right.
And like the lady running it would always say, like, you don't need to love it, but we can still pull from it. And what themes and what did we learn? And so it was a great thing to push myself.
Yeah, totally. And sometimes, I resist to the bitter end and until right before the meeting. And then I'll start the book. And then usually I'm not disappointed.
Yeah.
But it's been fun and now I will tell you, and I hope my book club members are not listening to this, but I do, because I have three, I try sometimes to connect, have all three read the same book so that I can
Yeah.
save myself a little bit. A little cheating there, but it's great to have groups of friends who love books. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Adds more to the experience of it for
it certainly
sure.
does.
Well,
Yeah.
how in your busyness do you find time to read between the writing and working and all of that?
Well, one key is I have my own law firm, and my boss loves me. So she gives me the time that, and I'm fortunate in this way in that I'm able to decide what cases to take and what cases not to take. And
Yeah.
so I keep the pace mostly moderate by picking and choosing what I want to do. So that's really the key. I don't have a boss other than myself. And I have some hours in the day that I'm not reading or writing or practicing law, but I'm not sure what I do in those hours because they can take up so much time. So
Life.
yeah, life, yeah, yeah, yes, totally. Yeah.
I didn't ask you back towards the writing section, but I think it could still fit in now. So obviously you have the resettlement. Listeners, I record in advance, but it's coming out here shortly. Are you working on any other upcoming projects?
I am, and of course, writers are a little superstitious about talking
Sure.
about projects, but I will say that the resettlement of Vesta Blahnik ends in 1938. And at the time, war clouds were looming.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I'm really interested in is I'm not I've read a lot of World War II novels, and I'm not really interested in writing that as much
Yeah.
as I am fascinated by how a state like the one I live in transforms in a time of war. And so I'm looking at some of the characters in the book to see if they might reappear on a home front type
Yeah.
setting. There's so much to learn about how a state like mine transformed
Yeah.
during the war. We went from a state that was very poor, very poorly educated, bad health care to, in 4 years, just a complete transformation. And
Wow.
so that's sort of interesting to me, but I don't know yet is the answer. But I'm back in my workshop, and so every week I have a deadline, and so I'm working as on a weekly basis on my various projects.
Yeah. Well, good luck with
Thank you.
that.
Thank you.
You have been so gracious to bring a book flight with you today. Can you tell us how you chose these books?
Yes. So I think that Vesta Blahnik in my book is a strong female protagonist, and she deals with difficult climates, and she deals with a difficult relationship situation. And so I was looking for books, historical novels with a strong female protagonist with some of those themes.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, what is the first book you brought today?
So the first book I brought today is Of the House of Doors by Tan Tuan Ing.
Okay.
And it's a book set, and all three books, my book and the other two books, are set in the early 20th century. They're
Okay.
historical novels, and they all involve a female protagonist in a relationship of some sort. And The House of Doors is set in 1910 and 1921, in two different time periods. And the lead character is a woman in Malaysia.
Okay.
Um, and very different climate, obviously different continent. And its historical context is that those two periods of time were very important in Chinese history because a lot of Chinese immigrants were living in Malaysia at the time, or Chinese refugees, honestly, because
Sure.
of the political difficulties at that time. And so the book focuses on a marriage in Malaysia, and some of the characters that show up in the book are Sun Yat-sen, who was the first president post-imperial China,
Okay.
and that really did happen in that time period. And another character that shows up in the book is the British author Somerset Maugham. And the characters, as they, the first of all, one of the interesting thing about all three flights is the different climates. This is a balmy,
Sure.
beautiful climate, and yet there's intrigue in the marriage. There's secrets that they don't tell each other. The context of upcoming war is present in all three books, and in this case, the presence of an upcoming there, the Great War was getting ready to happen and then
Sure.
had happened, and also Chinese conflict was a big part of the story. But the interesting part to me was the main character who struggled to find her voice and struggled to find her peace, and also in some ways her home, because also in all three books, the female protagonist had to leave their home.
Yeah.
And so sort of the concept of home and how to find it and how to find a new home, that was also present in the House of Doors.
Yeah, this is admittedly, I feel like an area of the world I don't know much about. So I would love to read this book because I think that's for me, I love learning history this way through fiction because it also like I can learn, but I'm getting a great story to kind of get through it. It's not reading a history text while trying to do it.
Sure, and that's exactly why I read historical fiction too, and it's also an area that I was not familiar with, an
Yeah,
area in the world that I was not familiar with, and I thought it was so interesting. So a lot of the book is centered on a community, kind of expats, and
sure.
any kind of community where there are expats, and then individuals, communities who were born and raised there. There's always a little tension, always a little bit of interest in how they interact with each other, and so there's some racial tensions and there's some cultural tensions. This book has everything.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I definitely need to add this one to my list. So
Yeah.
this was The
Yeah.
House of Doors, Tantuan Ink.
Yeah, and he has written other books as well, but that's my first
Okay.
from him, and I really enjoyed it. It's got lots of, extremely beautiful writing and
Yeah.
interesting themes, and you will immerse yourself in a whole different part of the world.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for sharing that one. What is the last book you brought then? Because we have The Resettlement of Vestiblanec, we have The House of Doors, and then what is the last one you brought today?
So the last one is a book called that's just come out this year called The Last Whaler. Um,
Okay.
and it's by Cynthia Reeves. And The Last Whaler is set in yet another continent. It is set in Svalbard, which is an island in the north, in the Arctic Circle, north of Norway.
Okay.
And it's set also in 1937, interestingly. Climate is a huge part of the story. A couple decide the male part of the husband in the couple is a whaler, and
Okay.
whaling is beginning to become outlawed or severely restricted, and his way of living is threatened. Similarly, the first war is past, the new World War II is looming, and it's about that too. But the the husband and the wife decide to go to a whaling station in the Arctic Circle, and
Wow.
the female protagonist is an Arctic botanist, and so she hopes to
Okay.
go up there and do her work, and they get stuck over an Arctic winter. And
Wow.
so there could not be a greater contrast from the balmy Malaysia. You learn so much about whaling and botany
Yeah.
and also the surviving an Arctic winter that of course in the summertime it never gets dark, and the wintertime it never gets light.
Yeah.
And so
So hard.
yeah, and so and similar to Vestiblanec, except not as extreme, survival becomes a huge, thing in the book. And of course, as with the other two books, it's a couple, their secrets, they're navigating a world together, not exactly aligned. And so, that's where all the interest is for me. So
Yeah.
and it was interesting just in terms of the climate. the climate piece, there's some environmental issues in all three books. But also like the last whaler is in the Arctic Circle. The House of Doors is in Malaysia, and Vesta Blahnik she's in Minnesota in the wintertime, which is unbearably cold. And then she's in North Carolina in the summertime, and it's unbearably hot. So it sort of bridges both the climate and the continents. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, that sounds great. I will have to, like you said, maybe, and this is why I love doing the book flight, because you can go and you can then read these books and kind of pair them all together and you can read, and
Yes.
it's just such a fun way to read, I think. So
Yeah.
that was The Last Whaler by Cynthia Reeves.
Yes.
I actually, because I read quite a bit of historical fiction, I don't always add a dessert pairing, but I have a book recommendation for you that I think that since
Excellent.
you've been talking, I'm wondering, have you read Salt Houses?
No, but other people have recommended it. So you're
Okay.
the second person. So
Okay, like, and maybe I'll just give a little recap here, but it's
yes.
by Hala Alyan, just so the listeners too, if they're intrigued. It's a little bit more contemporary to your time period. I believe it starts in the 1950s, if I remember correctly, but it's actually a book about a Palestinian family. And the book starts out where the mother, her name is Salma, she's having coffee dregs read. And this is how they predict the future when a marriage is coming. And so you get this bit of culture piece, and it's something that I didn't know, and so I'm like learning, they kind of are teaching about that, but it's the night before her daughter's wedding, and the prediction in the coffee dregs is not good. So they decide not to tell her, which was also kind of, you're not supposed to be doing either. You're supposed to give these predictions no matter what. But the 6-day war starts shortly after her daughter's wedding,
Hmm.
and they're forced to relocate. They're forced to leave Palestine and move to Kuwait. And then again, the family is forced again to move to Kuwait in 1990 after Saddam Hussein's invasion, where the family is once again scattered. So the book's kind of where they move to Kuwait, they're kind of trying to resettle their life, but there obviously was some scattering of family members. It happens again in 1990, and it's them trying to kind of recollect the pieces of that. And there's this like underlying current of the book where there's this heartbreak in the family where they're not able to return to their home. It's just not safe enough for them to return to their home, and they're forced to assimilate in these foreign cities that they've been displaced to. And it's told from multiple family members, but it's also got those elements of hardship and displacement that you're talking about, but you're also, I don't remember so much if you're learning so much about the place, but you're definitely learning about their culture. And I think that's a beautiful part of historical fiction as well.
Me too. That sounds fabulous. Thank you for the
Yeah,
recommendation.
so maybe you could add that on, listeners, if you'd like another
Right.
little
Totally.
recommendation there. But that was Salt Houses. It's by I think it's Hala Alyan.
Okay.
But I'll have all of those titles in the show notes as well. So, how I'd love to end our show is with our bonus pairings, which are just a speed round of questions you can answer really quick. Are
Okay.
you a rereader?
Yes.
Okay. All right. And then what is one book you've read that has changed your life?
And that's a hard one. I will say Angle of Repose by
Oh,
Stegner.
yes.
It's a beautiful book, also, of course, about a relationship,
Yeah.
also set in a certain historical time. Um, it's a book that sort of reminded me at a place and time when I was struggling to figure out if I wanted to write, just the beauty of paragraphs and pieces of a book that stay with you forever. I mean, I can still see scenes from that book in my
Yeah.
head.
That was actually that book club I was telling you about introduced me to Wallace Stegner because I had never read him.
Mhm.
So we read one of his books in there.
Yeah.
Where is your favorite place to read?
I would say my bed, but that is not the most effective place for me to read because I fall asleep. And so I will say that I have a wonderful chair by the fireplace. And so obviously in the summertime that doesn't work. But in the wintertime, that's where I read. And then the summertime, I have a glassed-in porch so that I
Okay.
can, eavesdrop on the neighbors. Not really. But watch what's going on in the neighborhood and also, sort of cuddle up into and with my favorite books.
Lovely. That sounds so nice.
And
Lastly, what are you reading next?
so I have, because I'm getting ready to do a book tour, I'm pairing up with some other authors, and there's a book, another South Carolina writer that I'm
Okay.
reading, and his book is called Peace Like a River. His name is
Oh, yeah.
Scott Gould.
I just interviewed him on Monday.
Oh, okay, okay. So well, you
Yeah.
know exactly who I'm talking about. So
Yes.
that's next on my list.
Okay. I loved it. I
Good,
hope you do
good.
too.
Glad to hear it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show with me today. I know your time is precious and I appreciate all you've given me.
Well, Kara, it was a delight. Thank you. I've learned so much and I've enjoyed so much talking with you.
Yeah. Thank you so
All
much.
right.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode today with Denise Cline, including her book flight featuring historical fiction books. We'd love to hear what other books you'd pair with this book flight at bookishflights.com. If you enjoyed the show, please head over to Apple Podcasts and leave a review. Your review not only helps the show, but it also helps the podcast to reach others. Make sure you are subscribed on Apple Podcasts or Spotify to make sure you will not miss an episode. That's it for today. Thank you so much for listening. As Emma Thompson said, I think books are like people in the sense that they'll turn up in your life when you most need them. Cheers to you, dear readers. Until next time.